Hi, good morning. So this is Super G. This morning we're going to have a little look through the bits and pieces which are on board the boat, where they're kept, and any of the quirks of the stuff that's on board the boat and how we need to use it. So we're going to look at taking the cover off of Super G and how it fits. So the cover doesn't fit as you would expect. So we've got to tie the straps onto the loops on the side here. This one here, it clips on like so. So we unclip that one. Moving down the cover, they don't all fit neatly onto where you might expect. So what we've got to do is tie them on to the handles, round turn and 2/2 hitches, or something similar to that. So that comes off like so. And we eventually get to all of the covers. And then again, it's the same stuff on the other side. So we then take the cover off. And the cover is stowed in here. And I just need to get the back seat cover, and we're going to stow that into the same place. The back seat cover is held on by a bungee. The bungee loops through the ring on the back there. Now there are poppers on the cover, but there's nowhere on the seats to pop those poppers. So we just sort of wedge it underneath the seat as best we can do. Okay, so we've got on board the boat, we've taken the cover off. Next off, we're going to switch the electrics on so we can start getting things set up on the boat. So the battery switch, we need to open up this back seat here, and the battery isolator switch is down here. So it's got two positions for the two batteries, batteries 1 and batteries 2. We turn the switch into the 6 o'clock position so that we've got both batteries working. And that allows us to start the engines and run the electrics. Life jackets. So when you get on board, you're going to want to get some life jackets. We've got 10 life jackets on board, stowed underneath the helmsman's seat. Pull the rubber catch down, open them up, and then we've got our Go Sail life jackets stowed in here. Just going to pop it on. As I mentioned, we've got the buckle at the front, and we've got the crotch strap. One of the parts that I rarely see people wearing, but if you do fall in the water, this crotch strap is really going to make a difference. If you fall in the water, put it nice and tight, and it stops your life jacket from riding up. So we're going to get the keys out now. Keys stowed underneath the seat alongside the helmsman. The keys are kept in the overboard bag here. It's a dry bag. Also the logbook is kept in here. So we have the keys. Something about the keys, we've got a key for each engine. We've also got the kill cord here. Now attached to the key ring there is a spare kill cord part. Okay, so if the driver does fall overboard with a kill cord, whilst you remain on board the boat, you've still got a spare. So I'll just pop those in position. You've got one for the port engine, one for the starboard engine. Then we get out the kill cord and pop that on. Okay, so with the kill cord, a really handy place to attach it is around the crotch strap on your life jacket. So you wrap it round and then clip it back onto itself. And there's your kill cord. It's nice and low and out of the way. It's not going to interfere with the steering, and it's not going to interfere with the throttles. Right, so we've got the keys in, kill cords on. We're going to lower the engines now. So we've got the two buttons on the top here where we can lower the engines individually, or there's a button on the side. If we press the button on the side, then both engines lower down. Now it's important that we have them lowered all the way down to the bottom, because if you lower them down to the bottom, you've got the maximum control when you're manoeuvring the boat in the harbour. So push it until it's as low down as it's going to go. Instrument covers. So each instrument has got its cover. We're going to pop the covers off. So we've got ones for the Suzuki engines, one for the Garmin VHF radio, one for the chart plotter, and another for the Fusion stereo system. Now each of the covers, they handily sit underneath the seat alongside the helmsman. On the inside of the instrument covers, we've got a QR code which will take you to the digital online electronic logbook. So in the logbook we can record things like the engine hours, how much fuel you've used, any incidents you've had, or any defects or damage that's been happening to the boat, or anything that GoSail needs to know about. Switching on the Garmin radio. The power button at the top here, where the 16 Plus is, now it's an unfeasibly long press. It's longer than you might expect. So it's a good couple of seconds to get the VHF radio to switch on. Then, when it's on, one of the useful features of this radio is that we can program it with specific channels ready for navigating around Jersey. If you tap the button underneath the scan icon and then tap the save channels, that then automatically scans through channels 14, 82 and 16, which are the vessel traffic services for St Helier, the Jersey Coast Guard and the emergency channel. Okay, we're going to switch on the GPS chart plotter. Power button on the top right hand corner there. Give it a little moment to warm itself up and load the software. Then there's the obligatory agree to not using the GPS as your primary source of navigation when the maps have loaded. Now with our chart plotter, there will be a number of waypoints in there. Every so often I go through and I delete all the waypoints and the routes because we just don't know why or what the waypoints have been created for. So if you're going to use the boat, be prepared to put your own waypoints in, but don't expect them to always be there. So here's the agree part on the screen. And then we've got the map. So it's a touch screen, so you can use the buttons there to touchscreen buttons to zoom in and out, or you can use your fingers to zoom in and out. The stop panning icon here will take you back to where the boat is. When we switch the engine's ignition to the on position, the Suzuki instrument displays, they start up and they display a number of information. So we're due a service on the boat, so if you do see the change oil icon come up here, just tap the set button on each unit and then that will remove that warning, but we'll know about that and be able to arrange the oil change. From the starboard instrument display, we've got the up-down arrows to show you the fuel used, economy. What you might be useful in is there's fuel total. So if you're running the engines economically, you're looking around about 20 to 25 litres per hour. And then the trip counter is in there. That's the engine hours. That's for us to use, but there is a part in the logbook which just asks for the engine hours. Again, that says we can monitor servicing. So there's various different bits and pieces here. This fuel use figure is going to be useful for you to know how much fuel you've used on your trip. At the top here, that's the RPM for the boat, and a useful little side tip there is that at around about 1400 RPM on both engines, you're doing 5 knots, which is useful for going through the harbour. If we press the set button, it changes over the way various different parts of the screen look together. Now on this screen here, there's a quirk with the fuel tanks. So it's showing us that we've got fuel tank number 1 and fuel tank number 4. There is only one fuel tank on this boat, and the fuel tank sender was never calibrated from new, and we've never managed to get it to work properly. So we've got to go on the number of litres of fuel which are used, not this fuel gauge here. So, starting the engines on Super G. There's some bits and pieces to be aware of because I quite frequently get a phone call or a panic phone call. I can't get the engine started on the boat. Now this is key to it. If either one of the engines is in gear, then the engine won't start. So I've got the starboard engine in gear. If I try and start it now, nothing happens. If I try and start the port engine, nothing happens. The other big reason why the engines won't start is this kill cord down here. If the kill cord is not in, neither engine will start. So we need kill cord in, engines in neutral, then we should be able to fire the engine up. That's one engine going. There's the second engine going. And what's useful to do is turn the wheel to starboard. Then you can ask one of your crew to have a quick look over the back of the boat to check the telltale is coming out the back of the engine. So the anchor locker at the front of the boat here. So to get to the anchor locker we need to move this cushion. It's held in place with a couple of poppers. So just pop those off, move the cushion just to the side. Then we've got our anchor locker. So in the anchor locker we've got flares, anchors and the sea anchor. Now when it comes to using the anchor, one of the things to be really careful of is to try and avoid dragging the chain over this part of the anchor locker. So we would put the anchor over the bow, have it resting in place, and then with it resting in place like so, then we can feed the chain out, but without dragging the chain over this part of the locker. And likewise when it comes to putting it back in. So in the locker here we've got our flare box, our sea anchor and our anchor ball. So some of the safety equipment here, basically if you're having a bad day and you need to get the flares out, you're probably best off getting your sea anchor out as well, or anchoring. So that's one of the reasons why the flares are up here. It's also one of the few places where there's enough space for the flare box. The coded boat. So we've got a life raft on board the boat. Now some people might think that having a life raft on a rib is a bit pointless because it's a boat which isn't going to sink in theory. However, it is a boat that can capsize and it's a boat that can catch on fire. So in both those scenarios, a life raft could be pretty handy. So our life raft here is stowed with a hydrostatic release unit. So in the unlikely event that the boat does sink, if the boat was to go down to a depth of 4.5 meters, then that would cut the painter and the life raft would float free. Now, as I've just said, it's unlikely to sink. So if you are going to use the life raft, just untie the ropes and then make sure that the painter is attached securely to the boat. So I'm going to show you the painter in a moment, but the painter is the white cord here. Make sure that's tied to the boat before you throw the life raft over the side. Otherwise, all you're doing is throwing a perfectly good white box into the water and then watching it float away, which is not really what we're after. In the event that the steering fails, we might need an emergency tiller. So we just so happen to have one of those on the boat. In the locker where we keep the cover, we've got two little bits of metal. So we've got this little bracket here, which will fit over the engine mounts. And then we've got this tiller here, which go over the top like that. So if it was attached to the engine, we've then got a tiller that we can steer the boat. Now there is an additional part to this, which we'll get onto when we look inside the console. Inside the locker here, we've got a changeover switch for the hydraulics for the steering. So in the event of steering failure, we'd operate that switch and that will disengage the hydraulics in the system, and then we'll be able to use the emergency tiller. This is our safety ladder. It's also the boarding ladder if you decide you want to take a swim. So it's got these three clips. They clip nicely to the A-frame on the back of the boat, and so if you go for a swim, you can just use this to climb back and board the boat. The reason why there isn't a dedicated ladder on the boat is that in between the outboards there's not space for a ladder, so we use the emergency ladder as our swimming ladder. Now that ladder, it lives in this console here. Other bits and pieces which are in there, there's a grab bag for the life raft, and there's also a couple of emergency buckets. They're stowed in there. In this locker here, we've got the grab bag, which has got the paper logbook in it. Also in here, we've got a mandrolic foghorn. There's also an electric foghorn on the dashboard there. We've got another dry bag which contains a code of practice and training manual, basically how to stay alive if you need to. We've got some paper charts in here, and we've also got a box of goodies. We've got a spare handheld GPS, spare VHF radio, a hand bearing compass is in here, and we've got a couple of emergency torches. There's also a dinky little toolkit. We've got a couple of fire extinguishers. There's 300 litres of fuel on board this boat, so if it's a small fire, perhaps try and tackle it with the fire extinguisher, but to be honest, if the boat catches fire, you really want to be thinking about hopping into the life raft and taking the gear which I've shown you in this locker with you. Mooring lines, when they're not in use, the mooring lines we keep in the lockers at the back. Feel free to put your bags and bits and pieces in there. Now in the aft locker, we've got our 2 horseshoe life buoys, one with a buoyant line on it, the other attached to a drogue and a light. In here we've also got our fuel filters, priming bulbs, one for each engine, so there's one this side and one on the other side, and there's also fuel shut-off valves, so again in the event of an engine fire you might want to shut off the fuel to the engine. We've also got our batteries for each engine, and in between the batteries there's a toolkit, again for possible emergencies. There's also a black bag in here. In that black bag we've got a foot pump which will allow us to pump up the tubes should they become deflated, and we've also got a couple of oars for the comedy moments of trying to row this boat. So that was how the boat's set up, where the bits and pieces are on the boat. We're now going to have a little look at taking the boat on and off of the dock. Now we're going to take the boat off of the pontoon. So engines running, engines straight, so have a look over your shoulders, check you've got the engine straight. Now to take the boat off the dock, if the dock's dry, it can get a little bit sticky, so if it's really not wanting to budge, you might want to put a hose over it, but normally this method works absolutely fine. First off, pop the engines into reverse, then what we're going to do is we're going to pulse the engines a few times. Pulsing up to full power, then as the boat starts to move back into neutral, then into forwards gear. The forwards gear part slows it down. It holds the boat against the dock and stops you from shooting off over to the other side of the dock. And then when you're off of the dock, you can reverse away and off onto your jolly travels. Okay, so as we're approaching the dock, we're going to come slightly over to the left-hand side of the middle if we can do. Just a gust of wind caught me there. We're going to turn the boat in, so as we start aiming at the end of the pontoon with the bow, but that's going to mean that we overshoot the dock ever so slightly. But what we're aiming for is for the bow of the dock to just make contact with the blue part on the dock, and as soon as it makes contact, we're just going to pop it into gear. So we've made contact there, push it into gear. Now what we do is we spend our time getting the boat straight. So we've got it in gear, just on tick over in forwards there, just spend some time getting the boat straight. When we're confident that the boat is straight and it's not turning around too much, then we're going to slowly increase the power. The boat's going to start to ride up, a bit more power, the boat rides up. Feels quite alarming, but that's the boat back onto the dock. When it's on the dock, back into neutral, and away we go. So we might hear some loud bangs or stuff like that. When we hear those bangs, that's the dock hitting the pontoon. It's not the boat hitting the dock. And there's no danger of the James Bond style scenario where the boat flies over the dock. So that's not going to happen. Okay, we've got the boat back on the dock. We'll just go through a little bit of a shutdown procedure now. So first off, we'll switch the engines off. Raise the engines fully so that they're out of the water. Okay, there's the engines off. Then we'll just switch the ignitions back on. Then we're going to grab out the instrument covers, make a little note in the logbook of what we've done using the information from the instruments here. Switch the engines off, then we're going to go and switch the electrics off down at the back. Switch the batteries off. And the final part is to take the bow line and we're going to just tie it off with an oxo knot on the cleat here. So all the way around once, make an O, then our X, and finally an O. Then we leave the rest of the line on the boat, and that's us tied up, covers on, and we're all good to go. Now the covers are back on for the instruments, the keys are put away back in the dry bag. All that remains for us to do is to put the cover back on, as discussed earlier in the video. So thank you very much for watching this familiarisation video on our boat Super G. So we've covered the familiarisation of the boat, how to use her to safely get her on and off the dock, some of the safety equipment on board the boat. So now you can take the boat out and all that remains for you to do is to go sail.